You have spent so long feeling everyone else that you forgot what it feels like to feel yourself. Not occasionally, not in the hard moments, constantly. The person next to you at work is anxious, and your chest tightens before they say a word. Your mother calls, and before she speaks, you have already absorbed the specific quality of whatever she is carrying today. You walk into a room, and the emotional atmosphere hits you like weather, fully, completely, before your mind has had time to process a single piece of conscious information. You feel everything, and somewhere in the middle of feeling everything, you lost yourself. Not dramatically, not in a single moment you can point to and say, that is where it happened. Gradually, imperceptibly, through the slow accumulation of 1,000 moments where someone else's emotional reality was louder than your own, where what they needed took precedence over what you felt, where the path of least resistance was to absorb and manage and hold, rather than to stop and ask the question you have almost forgotten how to ask. What do I actually feel right now? Not what are they feeling? What am I feeling? And when you try to answer that question honestly, there is often a silence where the answer should be. Carl Jung spent decades studying exactly this. The specific psychological condition of someone who has developed extraordinary sensitivity to the interior lives of others, and in doing so, has lost reliable access to their own. He called what is possible on the other side of this individuation. The process of becoming who you actually are beneath everything you have absorbed from everyone else. And what he discovered about how empaths specifically move through this process is going to change how you understand every moment of confusion and exhaustion and lostness you have been carrying. Stay with me, because this is not a video about setting better boundaries or protecting your energy. Those things matter, but this goes somewhere those conversations never reach. And this goes to the root. Let me tell you what has actually been happening to you, not the simplified version, the true one. Jung identified something he called emotional fusion, the specific psychological state of someone whose boundaries between their own interior life and the interior lives of others have become so permeable that they can no longer clearly distinguish between what is theirs and what they absorbed. Most people experience this occasionally, in moments of deep grief shared with someone they love, in the specific quality of being genuinely moved by someone else's pain. The empath experiences it constantly, not because something is wrong with their nervous system, because their nervous system is doing exactly what it was designed to do with extraordinary efficiency. The human nervous system was built to receive social and emotional signals from other people. This is how we survive together. This is how parents know what their infants need before the infant can communicate it. This is how communities sense danger collectively. This is how genuine human connection across the distance of individual experience becomes possible. The empath's nervous system does this at a magnitude that most people's systems do not reach. They do not just receive the signals. They receive them with such completeness and such depth that the signals land as their own experience, not as information about someone else, as lived sensation in their own body, their own chest, their own stomach, their own nervous system, running someone else's emotional reality as though it originated in them. Jung said this is not a pathology. It is a sensitivity so developed that without the specific psychological skill of conscious differentiation, it becomes indistinguishable from dissolution. From the outside, a fully functioning person. From the inside, a person who cannot always locate the boundary between where they end and everyone else begins. But here is where Jung made the observation that changed everything I understand about what empaths are actually dealing with. He said the problem is not that empaths feel too much. The problem is that they were never taught what to do with what they feel. The sensitivity arrived, fully formed, often before they had language or framework or any adult in their environment who could explain what was happening or why they were experiencing the world so differently from the people around them. And so they did the only thing available to them. They adapted. They built a persona around the sensitivity rather than a relationship with it. They became the person who absorbs, the person who manages, the person who holds, the person who is always available for other people's emotional reality, because making themselves available was the thing the sensitivity most naturally produced, and because being useful with it was the closest thing to understanding it that their environment offered. And that persona, the empath, the healer, the one who always understands, became so thoroughly inhabited that the person inside it began to lose access to the parts of themselves that existed before it. the preferences that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs, the emotional experiences that belonged purely to them and not to what they were absorbing, the desires that were quiet enough to be overridden every time something louder arrived from outside. The interior life that was genuinely theirs. Jung called what lives in the space between who you present to the world and who you actually are, the shadow. For most people, the shadow holds the qualities they suppress because they are considered socially unacceptable. For empaths, it holds something more specific, the parts of themselves that could not survive the emotional demands of constant availability. The needs they learned to edit before they could be expressed because someone else always needed more. The anger they sealed away because being the one who absorbs and heals and understands left no room for being the one who is angry about the cost of it. The selfishness, legitimate, healthy, entirely appropriate selfishness, that they abandoned so early and so completely that they sometimes cannot access it, even when their survival requires it. The simple experience of wanting something for no reason except that they want it, not because it will help anyone, not because it will make the room easier, simply because it is theirs to want. All of this is in the shadow, and here is what Jung understood about the shadow that most people find genuinely disturbing. It does not disappear. It does not accept permanent exile quietly. It runs the life from underground, through the exhaustion that arrives from nowhere and from which no rest fully recovers, through the chronic sadness that has no identifiable source because its source is not in the present, but in the decades of a self being steadily submerged beneath everyone else's emotional requirements. Through the specific confusion of a person who can describe other people's inner worlds with extraordinary precision and cannot find the words for their own. Through the relationships that keep depleting rather than nourishing because the pattern of giving without receiving is so deeply embedded that it reproduces in every relational context, regardless of how consciously you try to do it differently. Through the identity crisis that arrives not in the form of not knowing who you are, but in the form of knowing exactly who you have been for everyone else, and having no idea who you are when none of them need anything. Jung's map for how empaths specifically move through individuation has 4 stages. I want to be honest with you about all of them, including the ones that sound nothing like the liberation narrative you may have been hoping for. The first stage is shadow integration, not the gentle kind that feels like self-discovery, the confronting kind, the kind that requires you to look at what is actually in the shadow and stop performing the narrative that being an empath means you are purely the sensitive, selfless one who carries other people's pain because you care so deeply. Because the shadow also carries this, the specific and often unacknowledged satisfaction of being needed. The identity organized around being the one who feels what others cannot, the one who sees what others miss, the one who is somehow more attuned, more evolved, more psychologically sophisticated than the people who cannot feel the room the way you feel it. Jung was direct about this. He said the wounded healer who never examines their own wounds has often confused the need to heal others with the need to avoid sitting with their own emptiness, has often confused caring with controlling, has often confused compassion with the specific and very human need to be indispensable. This is not a condemnation. It is the most honest thing anyone can say to you about why the pattern has been so difficult to change. Because the pattern serves something, even while it cost everything. And until you can see what it serves, clearly, without immediately flooding it with self-forgiveness before you have actually felt the discomfort of the recognition, you cannot begin to build something genuinely different. The second stage is what Jung called the dark night of the soul for the empath specifically, the persona dissolution, the moment when the role of emotional caretaker stops working as a source of identity. And this is where most empaths stop. Not because they lack courage, because this stage has a specific and genuinely terrifying quality that nobody prepares them for. It is the discovery that when you stop performing the role, you do not know what is left, not in the catastrophic sense of complete psychological disintegration, in the specific sense of having organized your entire sense of self around being available for other people's emotional reality for so long that genuine availability for your own feels like a foreign language. You sit in the silence that appears when you stop absorbing someone else's experience. And the silence is not peaceful, it is disorienting. What do I actually feel? What do I actually want? What matters to me when nothing requires my management? Who am I when nobody needs anything? These questions arrive not with the excitement of self-discovery, with the specific vertigo of someone who has just realized that the ground they have been standing on was made of other people's emotional weight, and that without it, they are not entirely sure where they are. The third stage is what Jung called active imagination. For the empath, this means something very specific: the deliberate redirection of the sensitivity inward, not away from other people permanently, but toward the interior life that has been receiving almost none of the attention that has been flowing outward in every direction. Your dreams, your body's signals, the recurring feelings that have no identifiable source, because their source is your own unprocessed interior reality rather than anything in the environment. The things you feel when you are alone that have nothing to do with what anyone else is carrying. Your actual preferences, your actual desires, your actual experience of being alive in your specific life. The empath who begins to attend to this discovers something that is simultaneously obvious and startling. They have a rich and specific and entirely genuine interior life. That has been there all along, underneath everything they were absorbing from outside, waiting with the specific patience of something that has always been present, but never been the most urgent thing in the room. The fourth stage is what Jung called self-realization, the specific psychological development of someone who has integrated the sensitivity with genuine selfhood, not less sensitive, consciously sensitive. The difference between these two things is the difference between being a lake that absorbs every drop of rain that falls into it and being a river that receives the rain and moves it. Not stopped, not dammed. Moving with direction. The empath who reaches this stage can sit with someone else's pain completely, with the full force of their extraordinary capacity for being present to another person's interior reality, and simultaneously remain present in their own. They feel both, without confusion about which is whose, without the automatic mechanism that converts someone else's emotional weight into their personal responsibility. They can be in the room with someone who is suffering and choose, consciously and without guilt, whether and how to engage with that suffering, rather than having the engagement happen to them automatically before the choice is available. Jung called this the transcendent function, the psychological development that does not eliminate the sensitivity, but installs something in it that was always missing: sovereignty. I want to talk about what this actually looks like in practice, because Jung's framework is not theoretical for the people who need it most. It is the description of something they are living every day. You wake up, and the first thing you do before you are fully conscious is scan. Not intentionally, automatically. The emotional atmosphere of whoever is present, the quality of silence in the house, the specific weight of what yesterday left in the air. And before you have had a single thought that belongs purely to you, your nervous system is already oriented outward, already receiving, already processing someone else's reality, and beginning the calculation of what it requires from you. This is not love. This is not even empathy in its highest form. This is a nervous system that was never given the specific experience of its own interior life being the first priority of the morning. The practice Jung was pointing toward begins with something almost unbearably simple. Before you scan outward, scan inward. Not for long, not as an elaborate ritual. 3 breaths. In those 3 breaths, ask not what does this environment need from me today, but what do I feel right now? What is present in my body that originated in me? What is actually mine in this moment? This practice sounds small. It is not small. It is the beginning of the most important relationship available to you, the one with your own interior life. The one that has been waiting under all of the absorbing, with more patience than you have ever extended to anyone else, for you to notice it, to attend to it, to treat it with the same quality of care and presence you have always been able to offer outward, turned inward. Finally, for the first time, Jung said the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. For the empath, that statement carries a specific weight it does not carry for everyone, because becoming who you truly are, when who you have been is largely a function of who everyone else needed you to be, requires a specific kind of excavation, a specific kind of return, to the parts of yourself that went underground. When the sensitivity arrived and nobody told you that it was possible to feel everything and still be someone, that it was possible to be genuinely available to other people's inner worlds without losing access to your own, that the extraordinary capacity for depth and presence and attunement that defines you was never supposed to be the whole story. It was supposed to be the gift. And the gift was always supposed to belong to a self, a specific, particular, irreplaceable self, with its own interior life, its own needs, its own desires, its own experience of being alive that did not begin or end with what anyone else was carrying. That self is still there, under everything, under the years of absorption, under the persona of the one who holds, under the shadow of the needs that were edited out before they could be spoken, under the specific confusion of someone who has been so available to everyone else that finding their own direction feels like learning a language they were never taught. That self is still there. It has been there the entire time, waiting for exactly this, the moment you finally turned the sensitivity around and used it to feel yourself fully for the first time, without apology, without immediately asking whether someone else needs something, without the habitual override that converted your own experience into something that had to wait until everyone else was okay, just you, present to yourself, as genuinely and as completely as you have always been present for everyone else. That is the map Jung drew, and it ends here, in this specific interior territory. That has always been yours, that you are finally ready to enter. If this reached the part of you that has been exhausted in a way that has nothing to do with how much you have done and everything to do with how little of what you have done has been for yourself, stay with that. Don't move through it quickly. That specific exhaustion is information. It is the shadow telling you what the light has been missing. Share this with the empath in your life, who gives everything to everyone and saves nothing for themselves. They need to hear that the sensitivity that made them so available to the world was always also supposed to be turned inward. And subscribe, because what comes next is for the empath, who is ready to stop being a vessel for everyone else's experience and start being the author of their own.